Mike Wystrach, thank you for joining me today in EO 360. Appreciate you being here.
I appreciate you having me.
So, Mike, something that I think is probably relevant for people to know is who the heck is this Mike guy? Well, Mike built Freshly. If you're not familiar with Freshly, it's a meal delivery service. And you might be wondering why that's so interesting. Well, he started it in 2015 and in 2020 sold it to Nestle, Mike, for how much?
We sold it for 1.5 billion all in.
1.5 billion all in. That all in is an interesting add-on. I'm curious. We'll get to that in a minute. 1.5 billion in 5 years. Like, so when I've heard you talk about this, Mike, we're not starting the interview yet, by the way. I'm still in the middle of my intro. But when I've heard you talk about this, you don't seem at all impressed with yourself.
No, I mean, I generally am not, just because,
I'm impressed with yourself.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, it was an amazing team. I think we did a lot, so I think we're proud of what we did. But, I think I'm a very aspirational person. So, I'm looking always up and seeing things that others are doing and being amazed. But I think we're proud of what we did. So I wouldn't say impressed is a big word, because I would just be, but I think we're really proud of the hard work, the effort the team put into that. And, so proud is probably the best word I'd say.
I mean, 5 years. Like 5 years and you got up to 550 million in revenue. 5 years.
It was a rocket ship.
I'm proud of my accomplishments too, Mike, but it took me, I think, 5 years to hit, actually it might be like on the mark, like 4 or 5 years to hit 1 million in my business. And that's not uncommon. Like that's extremely common for, people to struggle to get to that million. And then of course to the 10 million and the 50 or 100 million is oftentimes just completely off the table. Anyway, let me continue on. Mike, stop interrupting me, damn it. So you went on to build Pet Folk, which is kind of an interesting story. I think you did that supporting your sister. Did I get
doing
that right?
Yeah. So that's currently going.
You're
so yeah, we're doing that.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a veterinary services company. You've raised over 100 million for that. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
I got to fact check while I'm saying these things. And then you also co-founded Cutting Horse, which is a VC firm focused on investing in consumer brands.
Yep.
All right. Raised how much did you raise for Cutting Horse?
We just closed our first fund. It was a $75 million fund.
75 million. I think if I'm not mistaken, you're the primary investor in that. Is that
I am
accurate?
one of the primary. Yes, I'm one of the investors. Yes.
Okay. Tell me this, Mike. I mean, you're young-ish, but it looks like you've been around more than a decade. 2015, you started Freshly. What were you doing before Freshly? Because I mean, Freshly, everything I know about you started in 2015.
Yeah.
Which is like, I started Freshly, but I'm pretty sure your life began long before that. What were you doing from an entrepreneurial perspective before 2015?
Well, so I think important, I'll go all the way back to the beginning. So
let's do it.
I love that. Grew up in a ranch in Southern Arizona with very entrepreneurial parents on both sides. So my mom was actually the rancher, so kind of inverse role. My mom was actually named Cattleman of the Year, so still cattleman, but
what was your mom's name?
Grace Wystrach. But both my parents were highly entrepreneurial. So industries they were in, gas stations, hotels, restaurants. I think we grew up around parents that, as long as I was alive, they had never worked for anyone. So previously, my dad's ex-military and my mom was a school teacher. But when me and my twin brother were born, they were already gone and they were full-time entrepreneurs at that stage. So we were born into an entrepreneurial family. So I think there is a degree of you know what you're raised in. So it doesn't seem foreign to you. So I think when I think most of the kids have now done entrepreneurial adventures because it's kind of not foreign to us. I originally after graduating college, I originally dreamed of being an investment banker. So I did that my first 2 years, 2004, 2005.
Where'd you go to school? Because
university.
Generally going from school to investment banking, you're probably pretty academically inclined. Is that
I
fair?
will. So I missed that portion of it. So I went to the University of Arizona, and I really didn't get serious about school until my last 2 years at the University of Arizona. But then I decided I wanted to work on Wall Street. Well, I joke that U of A is the Harvard of the West Coast. It certainly is not, or at least is not recruited in the same manner that Harvard is. So I decided I wanted to get into Wall Street. It was also the end of the internet bubble, so Wall Street was drastically hurting. But I got a few friendly interviews, and then I just annoyed the people that gave me. So the gentleman named Perry Boyle, who was the head of equities at a firm called Thomas Weisel Partner, gave me a friendly interview. Really, I called in a favor, and he had no intention of hiring me, or he wasn't even hiring. But I called Perry straight for a year. Every week I would call Perry, "Are you hiring?" Finally, at the end of a year, a little over a year, Perry's secretary called and said, "Michael, Perry got you an interview in New York with one condition: you stop calling." So that was my introduction. I think persistence. It's an old Calvin Coolidge quote: "Nothing can take the place of persistence." I believe in that. So
I'm with you 100%. I was just having this conversation with a friend of mine who I was visiting. I live in the Boston area, and she brought her daughter who just graduated high school. And so what do we do when we meet somebody who just graduated high school? We lecture them, right? We teach them everything we know because, exude our wisdom. What more greater gift could we give them? And so I told her about my lesson of persistence and the waves, the ocean waves being the most persistent thing. And that one wave by itself is not very much, but when you waves are constantly coming in like that, it's amazing what they can do. I'm with you 100%, and persistence being the number one power in the world.
It is. And I think that's what all great entrepreneurs have to have is, and we'll get into that, is I think persistence, willing to stay in the game, willingness to just keep going back. It's the person who will bang their head against the wall until it falls over is actually a great entrepreneur. It can make you, what makes you great can also make you challenging in certain aspects of life. But I think, so I got into Wall Street, did 2 years there, realized that I hated working for people. I think you have to sometimes do it, but,
were you good at it though? Because there's two different kinds of people. Like there's people that hate working for people because they suck at it. That was me. And then there's other kinds of people that hate working for people because they have all these ideas and they're not doing it the right way. Which one were you?
So I was the latter. I think I was good at my job. I just was highly frustrated. And I was also young and, highly hubris. And I was the smartest person there. And I knew all the things and not knowing what I didn't know. But I just became very frustrated with corporate America and how slow it was and how what felt like to me is very obvious things weren't getting done. And I was also, I laugh because I've had now employees like me and we're tough to manage because we always want promotions and I was I would imagine my bosses would say that I was good, but difficult. The kind of employee who wants a raise every 3 months. So I did that. That was my last time I worked for anyone. I guess you could kind of say Nestlé, but that was a little different. But I started doing my own stuff. And that was in 2005 was when I really kind of broke out and started doing my own stuff. And that was really more around things my parents were doing. So it was real estate, it was restaurants, things like that. It's kind of
wait. So you quit your job to get involved in real estate and restaurants?
I went back, worked with the family, and worked with my dad, who is entrepreneurial. And so I was given a fairly good reign to do more entrepreneurial stuff within the entrepreneurial organization. So, my dad had a real estate development. My dad is kind of the guy who just hands you the things and says, go figure it out, which is great. And so I was able to, really take this raw piece of land and develop this into a retail center and kind of figure it out. I was going. That led into me then saying, okay, well, now I want to do my own restaurant. And I think my parents are very supportive. So they were, I think they said, okay, you want to do it? Let's figure out how we're going to do it. I'd say goods and bads there. I think the bads are, and that is that sometimes when things can come relatively easy, you can sometimes do things that maybe you shouldn't. The restaurant was kind of a bit of, kind of an example of that, of not fully thought through, cart in front of the horse. and not fully kind of going through and saying, is this the thing I really want to do? Is this the passion that I have?
But you were young too.
But you're young. Yeah. So unfortunately it's like kids, right? It's like you wish your kids would just take your advice, but some things you just have to learn by doing and failing. So, while I would say you'd rather not fail for sure, when you do fail, you certainly want to learn from it. And, I look at of aspects of that time of my life where I learned the most, and not because I was succeeding and winning all over, because a lot of the times I was failing, and then you get a few hits and a few wins. But I think a lot of that kind of honed me into what I was good at, what I liked to do, what I didn't like to do. There was aspects of the restaurant that I really enjoyed, but then the aspects that I think you really make you a good restaurateur, I did not have. And that's really, what I've seen in smaller, really good restaurateurs is a passion to be at the restaurant 24/7.
What kind of restaurant was it?
It was a steak restaurant. So my parents have had for now going on almost 50 years, a steak restaurant down in Sonoyta, Arizona, which is a small hodunk town south of Tucson, and very successful. And so I said, I'm going to take that same concept and just move it closer to the people, and we, kind of multiple prongs. We chose an area where it was going to be high growth. Turned out that we opened our doors right into the 2008 recession. So it was kind of a very bad time to have a high-end steak restaurant in an area that was based on new doors or new residential development. And so learned a lot. Now, the bads of that is that business started failing. And the goods of that, in that business failing, is I was kind of scrambling to say, how can I save this? And while I came back from New York and really started I turned 30 and found that my health was not where I wanted to be. I was always kind of a gym rat, but I found out all of a sudden my diet mattered. And I think everyone hits a certain age where all of a sudden it's the diet starts mattering. I had a good family friend who was a doctor, and he was like, you got to eat better. And I was like, I don't even know what that means, but you draw me up a menu. I've got this restaurant. I'm going to have them cook it for me and just put it in to-go kits. And fast forward, I feel great. I lose a bunch of weight. My energy's higher. And the whole reason it's working is because I don't have to do any of the work. And so that was ultimately the idea that became Fresh.
Yeah, I see where you're going with this. So before we can, it sounds to me like we're right on the cusp of getting into Freshly. I want to hold on that for a second. When you left your investment banking job, and you said, hey, Mom, Dad, I want to come home. I want to get involved in the family business. To correct me if any of this is far off, but I want to get more involved in the family business. How did you and your parents come to a decision on what you would do and how you would be compensated?
Well, so my parents wanted me to come back. So it was more them recruiting me back. I was kind of unhappy with corporate America and saying hey, I really want more of an entrepreneurial. Okay. I think they kind of, it wasn't clear, and that's a little of how my parents have kind of always managed things. It's we'll figure it out as we go. I think there was a high degree of trust. My parents have been more than generous with everything. So I think from my standpoint, I wasn't worried of am I going to get taken care of? I think in full transparency, I think my dad needed help, but he needed help in so many avenues that he didn't even know what he needed help in, which was great for me because my dad is not a day-to-day manager. He's never has been. I think that's kind of one of the good things. I am a little more than he was, but he's just not a day-to-day manager. He is a full big picture guy. He's the vision, big picture. So I was able to come into a lot of the businesses and really get kind of process and granular on what needed to be solved. And I was able to do a lot. I mean, I was able to, from everything from refinancing, the business at that time collectively was doing, 14 million in sales, which is big for a small business, right? If you look at that, something like 120 employees. And so I was able to do a lot of kind of things at, relatively big scale for a 25-year-old who's never done these things. So whether you're looking at refinancing commercial loans, picking new insurance, going out to bid on these things. So I was able to kind of operate as an owner doing these things with fairly big autonomy. And, my dad's kind of not a detailed person. So, he'd be like, yeah, go figure it out. Get us a better rate. And then I'd come back okay, here's what we got. And so, that was, there's no better way to learn than do. right? I
Okay,
tell people that all the time.
so you probably, I'm making this up, so correct me if I'm wrong, but you probably said, look, I'm leaving this job in New York. My lifestyle is this. I'm making this amount of money. The business can afford it. I want, I want to transition my job into applying my skills to our business. This is the compensation I want to get, and boom, it happens.
Yeah, and I think there was more around the upside, and at the time was like, hey, we're going to hand the reins of the family business. Now, I think I always joke that the only thing worse than corporate America, family America. So ultimately, like me and my dad, our styles were very different. So ultimately, that conflicted, and it was not in like I'm still extraordinarily close, and even through that, it was clear that like I didn't want to work for my parents, and
Yeah.
In fairness, they were, it was probably harder on them. So they were probably like, okay, we're not sure we want you to work, because I was extremely opinionated. I want to do things my way. And so I did that for about 2 years. But then
this is where you got the idea that of maybe freshly coming down the pike, because so eating better.
Yeah, so I did the restaurant, and that was kind of my first kind of like, hey, I'm going to start doing my own thing. So I did that separate restaurant. My parents were involved in that and supportive, both financially, and also they were equal part owners on that. But that was kind of now my thing. And then I started doing other things, and then that ultimately became Freshly, and then Freshly completely spun out, and that was kind of now like the umbilical cord was completely cut. But I think both me and my parents kind of saw that was probably a better path for both of us. And it just kind of naturally came around. I don't remember any tough conversations or I'm quitting or any of these things. It was kind of like, I want to do this, and this is kind of where I want to lean into. And it's like, yeah, that makes sense. Let's offboard this. Let's figure out what we need to do to kind of move forward.
Did you sell the business, the restaurant, or did you shut it down?
No, it ended up shutting down. It was a whole big thing, a lot of learning lessons. One, don't ever sign a personal guarantee. Two, don't sign a long-term lease with a personal guarantee. So that ended up being very painful. But there's nothing like having $1 million judgment against you that says, oh shit, I gotta go really big and aggressive. So I had $1 million judgment sitting behind me. My dad was able to negotiate that to basically get the first installment of 200,000 3 years out. So I now had like a ticking time bomb of like, I got to go make 200,000 liquid, and then to pay this off. So I think, part of that is like, there is a degree where like the bridge is burned behind you. There is no retreat. So while I wouldn't necessarily say I'd do it over again, it was a tremendous motivator, having kind of that, shit, I got to figure this out, or I'm going to have to file personal bankruptcy because there was no cash in the bank to cover that.
Your parents were helpful, but not that helpful. It's not like they were just their bank account and say, here's the money.
They were helpful. I think the challenge was, as we all know, in 2008, it's like their small businesses, all of a sudden, all their small businesses are now going through. So they were in an equally kind of like horrible situation. So there was like no like, hey, we'll take care of it. It was like my dad was, juggling and did an amazing job juggling to get through that. But,
and he pulled out of it eventually?
He pulled out of it. And it took, for them, as with kind of small business, it took, 5-6 years to really get through that. Now they've, I think it's a good example, and my parents are great examples of like, their restaurant, but they've been in the game for 50 years. So it's a little bit of like, stay in the game. That restaurant is now just absolutely booming. But, for 40 of the 50 years.
They still have it today.
Yeah. And so for 40 of the 50 years, it was like an everyday struggle grind to pay the bills. But now it's like all the economics have kind of come, the buildings, like all the people have come, and now it's, they've done really well. But yeah, I think during that time frame, my dad was amazing in helping me. My dad is the single greatest person I've seen at handling adversity and just getting up and fighting the fight and just like. But so, he was a great example. It's just like, look, we'll figure it out. Like we're going to figure out, I'm going to get it time. And then, at the end of the day, he had a deal negotiated, and he said, he agreed that they would personally guarantee it on that. So the $1 million, they would personally guarantee again. And he just said, Michael, can you do it? And he's like, you got to come up with $1 million. Can you do it? I said, Dad, I could do it. So, that's just the kind of trust my parents have. Is like, I still remember the call. I was in a parking lot, and he said, this is the deal. Can you do this? And I said, I think I can. And he said, all right, let's do it.
All right. So where did the idea, well, I know where the idea for Freshly came up, but how did you take it from that idea and that health and fitness sort of stage of your life. How did you take that to 2015 and starting this up?
Yeah, so it kind of it went from the restaurant to where we were doing this. People started asking me to do it, and I said, you know what, I'm going to just go out and I'm going to send an email to a bunch of people in Tucson to see if how much traction this has. And I sent an email.
Grassroots, man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Like, right, I'm going to just send an email and see if anybody wants me to send them a meal.
Yeah, and so, it was like 100 people that I knew in Tucson. And, I set up this is like before you could easily set up a website. And I set up like this, and basically it was just click a button and get, food. Like, it would basically charge your credit card. And so I woke up the next morning and there was $2,000 in sales. And I was like, wow, like that, there's something here. And, it's kind of like everyone knows, it's like, yeah, I'd love to eat healthy and I just don't want to do the work. And if it tastes great and stuff. So, and that was like, I think sometimes you just need an early sign of success, something that tells you like, okay, there's sign. And then that was like the spark that made me think like, oh my God, there's sign here. And for me, it's like, and you were talking about, I'm generally a very big thinker whenever I attach to something. So it's always like, so my immediate thought was like, we're going to be the Amazon for food. Like, that's what we're going to build here. And so the idea was always big. And the idea was always like, how do we do this? So, I always tell founders the same thing. Is like, you want to disconnect the idea from logic, because if you want to build something big, you can't know exactly how to get there. And I think like, if you think about the 10-year journey of saying like, I want to do this, you can't think, well, this is how it gets done. It's like, is it theoretically possible? And then we'll just keep solving the next problem, the next problem, the next problem. So with Freshly, we did that. And we say 2015 was the beginning of Freshly. We'd actually started it a little earlier under a name called F3 Foods. So we'd had a year and a half of kind of like selling food through a commissary kitchen. In 2015, back half of 2014, we raised some capital, and we raised our first kind of outside, kind of not friends and family. So not people that knows us.
Who is we?
We was me and my co-founder. So I ended up I started the idea and I brought in my co-founder, a guy named Carter Comstock. So I was dating his sister at the time. He was living in Austin, Texas, doing ADP sales. So the ADP, the payment, the W-2, the paycheck processor, he was doing door-to-door sales there. And I was like, this sucks. You got to come back and do this. So I recruited him.
So you brought him into the business. I'm going to ask, you don't have to answer it, but how did you determine equity as a co-founder? You're like, right, we're at the beginning 50-50, or were you like, look, this is my idea. I've already got it off the ground. I'll give you, X%.
It wasn't 50-50. I'd started it. It was meaningful equity. I don't know the exact, but it wasn't 50-50. It was, somewhere around 70-30 or something, 64. I don't know what it was exactly.
Okay. And then you raised friends and family.
So then we raised friends and family. We raised a small just to do something. And then we raised a bigger kind of friends and family, but we brought on one outside investor. Now, we cold called probably 100 people. I mean, this is back in the days when first of all, if you weren't in either San Francisco or New York, VCs would not touch you. This is 2014. I don't think people understand how easy you have it today. Second of all, it was really hard to find out who these VCs were, right? So it was not you had Google, but you didn't have like these long lists, and it didn't tell you exactly what like VCs were investing in. So you would go and you just track down and you figure out these lists, and you just cold email people, because I didn't have a network of VCs. So we would just cold email and strike out.
Wait. So hold on a second. So you went from friends and family. How much did you raise before you started reaching out to VCs, approximately, give or take? Over $1 million?
Probably. I mean, no. Just back, we raised our first friends and family was 200,000. Okay. And then we raised an additional 100 off that. So that was 300 total. And then we went out to raise $1 million round. And that ended up being largely individuals, but ended up being one fund who wrote half of it. So the $500,000 was that. And that ended up...
Sorry, before VCs.
that fund was the first kind of VC fund that came in. And so while we were trying to raise the million, we really wanted to get a VC in. We didn't really know what a VC was, what they're like. So we were just pinging, cold calling, but we wanted to get someone in who was a professional. We had a lot of people write, $25,000 checks, and it was amazing that they wrote those checks, but they were really, hey, this sounds like a good idea. I don't know anything about this. And so we pinged everyone. And I still remember so we read this TechCrunch article on this new firm called Brand Project that is investing in early stage consumers. So we go on their website, they have two offices, one in Toronto and then one in New York. Well, it turns out the one in New York was actually the guy's house. So we sent it to New York, and I always joke, I'm like, thank God we sent food to Jay Body, because Jay will eat almost anything. He's the nicest, greatest guy in the world. But Jay, we sent a box of food to him, and Jay says, it's great. I love this food. This is amazing. And so Jay tells the other team that's all in Toronto. It's a Toronto-based fund. It's a Canadian fund. And he's the only one who lives in the States, that, hey, we got to call these guys. These are great. So Brand Project was our first institutional investor. And so Brand Project was great because, one, we had a vision of what we wanted to do, but their vision very much aligned with ours. That they were like, look, you guys got to change the name. We've got to do this. And their whole thing at the time was they were kind of like a pseudo external incubator, and they would come in and they had a branding team and they had this. And so they were a perfect partner.
What was the valuation at that stage?
Oh, I think $4 million. So we were doing $1 million, $1.5 million in sales, but
that was fast.
Yeah, we got up like relatively, I think $1 million. We were doing $1 million in sales. And then I think it was a 3 million pre and then a 4 million post is what we did. That was back. Again, the venture rounds you get now, it's just like this was a different era. And so they invested. They joined in June of 2014, and we then worked the next 6 months of really redoing what we were. And they came up, one of their team members, or I think Tether, who is the branding agency, actually found Freshly, and we said we love the name. We were thinking of Fresh. I was like, and Freshly, and Jay Body, who was the guy we sent the food to, was also he was our interim CTO for a while as well. His background's tech. He found the domain, and he's great at negotiating for domains. So we got freshly.com, which was amazing. And so we launched Freshly in 2015. So Freshly started as a full brand new company in 2015. So that's why we always say that 2015 is when Freshly started. It's maybe not the most.
And you were like $1.5 million into it in revenue at that point.
Yeah, we're doing about $1 million, but we were shutting off all that revenue and then turning on this. So Freshly was starting from zero in revenue. And
so you had to restart all those subscriptions.
Yes. Yeah, we didn't, because it was a different offering. We were doing these like a la carte meals, and now we were saying, okay, it's a subscription only, you can get it here. So we had to get a lot of those people to switch. But what we became really good at, and I think what I am very good at, and I've continued to be good at, is scale. And scale is a degree of like, how do you acquire the customers? How do you think about customer life cycle? How do you build the supply to constantly match this and do this really, really quickly? And so we were early on Facebook. This was back before it was Meta, and it was just purely Facebook, and back before Facebook had Instagram. And we were early on that, and we did an awesome job on figuring out exactly how to make Facebook work for food, and it was a new product. And so we scaled, we went from zero. In 5 months, we were doing 8 million run rate. So, it was just like, it was absolutely parabolic. Yeah.
Do you name Mike Salguero from ButcherBox?
Yes, I do. I don't know Mike himself, but I know the name, and I know the ButcherBox company very well.
Mike's a friend of mine, and I was in a small business group with him when he started to see the explosion of ButcherBox. And so I feel like I got a little of the inside scoop of this, but and that was a little after all this was happening. So you were at the very early stage of food by mail. Like I'm making food delivery service. I'm making that term food by mail up. But I mean, there were other companies in the space. It's not like you were the only one at this point, right?
So we were the only one doing ready-made meals. Freshly was the absolute innovators on ready-made. There was the others that were doing it. You had Plated, Blue Apron, and HelloFresh, and all of those guys were doing meal kits. So our whole thing was heat and eat it. So it was already pre-cooked meals. You just had to heat it in the microwave or the oven. 2 minutes and you have a meal. All of the other ones were doing meal delivery, meal kits. So you had to make the meal. So it was raw ingredients shipped to your house that you had to make.
So you said you're a master at scale. Well, I said the word master. You focus on scale. That's where your strength is. My God, I mean, scale. You're not wrong. Like 1 million, even the first 1.5 million in such a short window of time is incredible. And then I think in months you're up to 8 million. I mean, already I can't even comprehend how to produce or manufacture that many ready-made meals. How many ready-made meals is $8 million dollars worth in a month? Like, how many meals are you making monthly at this point? Any idea? Can you do the math on that?
I back into you could roughly divide it by 10 on that. So you're like 800,000 a year, and then divide that by. So it's like 80,000 plus minus 70 to 80,000 meals a month at that point.
How are you doing that a few months into this? I mean, did you have tell me about the manufacturing of the foods? Who's doing that? I mean, your restaurant's not doing this in the back office.
What you have to do, and I think you see this with companies that scale rapidly, is first of all, you have to hire slightly insane people. The people who join a SpaceX or what in the early days, they're off their kilter. They are people that love solving complex, challenging problems. They love working 24/7. So we hired, and that was our whole company. We constantly hired people that were just very into solving complex challenges and signing up for the journey, which was crazy. And the only way you can do that is brute force. And so, I mean, me and my co-founder had an apartment next to our facility that we shared, that we lived in both full time. We would do sleeping rotations. So you would never sleep more than 5 hours a day. And we always had someone at the facility, and we opened the doors at 2 and we'd often shut at 11, and we were always someone there. So, and at the early stages, like people always are like, oh, well, you're so lucky. And I was like, well, no one was saying that in the early days. People are like, what are you like? This is crazy. And then we hired a bunch of people like that. I mean, we had, our first head of ops, they were people that would sleep on cots in the office and then go back to work. And you never really had, I never told anyone to do any of those things. It was kind of like, hey, we knew what the job was and you had to get it done. We had a few golden rules. We never missed shipments. So if we told you we're going to ship your meal on this, we never missed it. And no matter what happened, we would figure it out. And that meant a lot of the times that you had teams there till 4 a.m, kind of working 16-hour shifts. But the team all believed in that commitment. And so you never had to tell someone, no, you can't leave. It was like, hey, we got the job to do. We got to get this done. And we kept doing that. So, we opened our first facility, and I think where I'm good at, and I think this is where, kind of a little of my now is, I think one of the things I bring for sure to companies is I'm very good at seeing around corners. And I always say the key with scale, especially in a consumer business is you're not scaling bits, you're scaling atoms. And scaling atoms is really difficult because scaling atoms requires supply chain, and so
I like the way you put that, bits and atoms.
Yeah, and scaling, so technology companies scaling bits is software can scale relatively easy now, especially. I mean, maybe back in the day when Twitter was scaling, that was hard, but those problems have largely been solved. So you can go from one app user to 100 million app users with very little kind of challenge on that. Consumer products, any consumer product that is a physical product is exceptionally hard, and consumer services, which require humans, has that same challenge. So you have to choose an aggressive path, and then you have to make forward advanced bets based upon how you do that. So I was always the one saying, hey, we need to go to this facility. And people would walk in the facility and they're like, you're crazy. Like, we're in a 10,000 square foot facility and I found a 75,000 square foot facility. And I'm like, I want to sign this lease. And everyone's like, you're nuts. Like, what are you doing? Like, we can't. And I'm like, we have to sign this because we're going to run out of capacity. And so I'm a fairly risk-on person on those kind of things. It's funny, on business, I can take risk and not get worried. But so you have to do those things. But then once you choose that path, once you get the $75,000 facility, that then puts you on that journey. So now you now have to ramp your marketing spend. You have to ramp your inventory so you're always making these forward deployment bets. I wouldn't advise for most consumer, and we actually advise the opposite, because Freshly got a lot of things right, but we got a lot of we were the beneficiaries of a lot of lucky things. We were the beneficiaries. And had you repeated Freshly 100 times over, probably 99 times it fails and 1 time it succeeds. You just need so many things to line up. When you're going that aggressively at scale, when you're doing things, you just take on a lot of risk. The time I was kind of not as aware to that. Now I'm a little more aware of what's the appropriate amount of risk, what's the, what's the upside, but that was crazy. I mean, and so I think for 5-6 years, the team just signed up for nonstop. I mean, at the end, when we sold that last week, we did 1.1 million meals that last week. So that was cool. Like, we had,
how many people on the team?
That was 2,500 people at that time. And, yeah, it was, we did all of our own manufacturing, all of our distribution. We did all of our first mile trucking. So there's like these cool, I was flying because we moved our headquarters back to New York, and I was flying to Phoenix, and I was flying over Dallas, and I was looking out the window, and I said, I wonder if we could just direct inject semis into the Dallas market so we could pick up all of Texas. And I started Googling, and I Googled distance between Dallas and Phoenix. And I said, it's 12 hours. So I said, yeah, there's no reason we can't do that. So that was our journey into first mile shipping. So what we would do is we would manufacture the product in Phoenix. And then from Phoenix, we would have our own trucks that would be our own contracted trucks, refrigerated trucks with 2 drivers. Because we found out that a truck driver can only drive for really 6 hours. Once you get to 6 hours of drive time, it's 8 hours total. But so what we would do is you'd have tandem drivers. So you would drive that truck overnight to Dallas, and then you would take a whole semi truck of our food and then direct inject it into the FedEx in the Dallas hub. And then that would give us all of Texas. So we were able to basically, from 3 manufacturing hubs, we were able to cover the entire continental United States. So when we sold, we had, I think, 30 different routes that we ran our own trucks. So we had a mini shipping company. We had a lot of stuff going on.
Were you profitable when you sold?
We were, yeah. We were profitable.
How long did that take? Like, when did you first see your accrual profitability?
We hit profitability the year before we sold. From an EBITDA standpoint, now that was adjusted because I had taken stock compensation, but we hit that so we sold in 2020. So we hit that in 2019.
Yeah. And tell me about, what were the major milestones between like 2014? Now let's start with 2015. So after the VC funding, what were the major milestones from the point at which you're 8 million to the 550 million? Were there certain moments that stand out for you? Yeah.
I mean, I think so I think we opened that big Phoenix facility in March of 2016. That was huge because that was our first true manufacturing. We were in what I would say more of a commissary kitchen. So if you kind of think about the spectrum of kitchens, on the far left is your residential, then you go into commercial, then commissary. Then from commissary, there's a big jump over to manufacturing, and everything changes. So commissary looks like just a bigger commercial kitchen. It's like the same equipment. Once you go into manufacturing, everything changes. It's all line production. It's big kettles. It's very different. So that was our true first manufacturing. So that really took us to a different level. I'd say the next big one was opening our East Coast facility, and that was about 2 times the size of our West Coast facility. That was completely custom built based. The previous one we kind of retrofitted. This was completely custom built for us.
Where was that on the East Coast?
That was in Maryland. I was in a town called Savage, Maryland, which is about an hour outside of Baltimore.
I would imagine anything north of that would have been way too expensive.
We ended up, so HelloFresh tried to copy us, and they opened a business. I forget what it was called, but they opened a plant in New Jersey, and they shut that down. And we ended up buying their plant in New Jersey. So we did have a smaller plant in New Jersey that we were able to just get for pennies on the dollar from HelloFresh.
But now you worked in the same office as HelloFresh. I mean, you were buddies with them, right?
We did, yeah. So we worked in the same WeWork when we were early in our journey. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of like New York was the center for what we call like food tech. And it was us, the Plated guys, Blue Apron, HelloFresh. We never saw those guys as competitors, because the reality is if you wanted to cook, we were a horrible option. And if you didn't want to cook, they were a bad option. So you could live, but we generally said, okay, 21 meals a week, you're going to go out for some of those, you're going to cook for some of those. So everyone can win. So we were really close with the Plated guys. We were close with the HelloFresh. A little like we were close with the US HelloFresh. I got to know Dominic, who's the CEO. Dominic's in Germany. I got to know him over the years. And we actually got a lot closer during COVID because of travel restrictions, they couldn't travel over here. So he was calling me a lot for like, hey, what are the updates on like, just trying to figure, that time it was like the regulations were changing state by state. And so we were all manufacturing because we were food. But there was so much stuff changing. So we were talking fairly regularly just to kind of get updates on the state of different stuff. But we were, the HelloFresh guys, I mean, we get it as well, as that's kind of the Rocket Internet. That's their background. They were funded by Rocket Internet, who's known to copycat. And so, they tried to copy what we did. And I think what for us, it was like, we've always said it's like our biggest challenge was not other people, was always ourselves. And I always think that way in the business is like, I want to be the best. And if you're the best, you're going to win regardless of who else. And so we always just try to focus on doing a better job. We want to do better with our customers. We want to do better with our employees. We want to do better with our team. And, the distraction, people are going to copy you if you're successful, full stop. But if you continue to be the best, you're going to win. And so when people, I don't ever take it personally. Like, again, now I want to win. So like, I'm not like, but I don't, you want to join? Great. Like, we're going to kill you. And I think we were really happy when they shut it down, because we were like, we told you. And, I gave him shit and said, I knew you guys weren't going to succeed on this, but I don't take these things as like like an insult or something.
Does something stand out as another major milestone between the point of the manufacturing plant that you mentioned and the sale? Was there any other major milestone, or was it just like steady hurricane for the next couple of years?
Kind of, nothing really. I'm trying to think, like there was no, we hit 100 million or two. There was no, like, we didn't stop and say, oh my God, like it was just like, there was always whack-a-mole with problems. So it was just like, I think
that's such a great way of putting it. It's whack-a-mole with problems, even at a company my scale, it's like constant whack-a-mole sort of mentality. I love it.
And you have to enjoy that, because that is like at no stage, if you're growing in your startup, like it just, the problems change, and often the problems actually get harder, and you look back with like rose-colored glasses at the old problems, because you're like, oh, I wish I had those ones. Those were easier to solve. These ones are harder. So yeah, people always say to me, like, question I often get is like, when did you know you made it? I was like, the day the money hit our bank account from the sale. Like that was the last, because I lived in constant, like, we always felt like we were, teetering right on the line. And I think when we sold and the money hit the bank account, then we were like, all right, we did it. We got we really built something huge here. And I think that was the last milestone that I would say was, really cool for the entire team to kind of see that.
When did you first think about selling? Was that something you had thought about right from the get-go? Or was that something where like in 2019, but you were VC backed. So naturally you're building this to sell.
Well, we were building it ultimately, I think originally, and was a thesis is like, we wanted to go public. We wanted to own this business for a long time. I do think there was kind of a culmination of a lot of things. So one, I think when you sprint that fast, that hard, you do just kind of get exhausted. And then I think the culmination, there was a lot of things that I think were really challenging for a larger, and I wouldn't say we were a huge company, but we were larger it's like you went through COVID, you went through a lot of these different movements that just go through your employee base, and they all kind of get sharpened and pinned down on the CEO. So, we had the BLM movement, we had, Asian Lives Matter, we had the Me Too movement, and all of those things meant there's just like different contingencies, customers. I mean, we had everything from FedEx was shipping guns, and when cancel culture came, there was a shooting, and we used FedEx, and because they shipped guns and their policy was not to ship guns, we were getting canceled because we were using FedEx. Because and so it's like, you don't understand, like we can't just like turn off FedEx and turn on UPS. Like these are deeply integrated relationships. So those things just started weighing on me. And I think where I was at the end, and COVID was like the big, COVID was kind of the final straw, where I felt like, hey, I was kind of exhausted. I didn't see myself doing this for another 10 years. And so we really kind of started thinking about like, hey, is it time to hand the reins over? What would that look like? I think it's just a culmination of a lot of things, but I think for me, it just came down to kind of just total exhaustion, or,
So you go to the VC and you're like, look, I think this is time. Is that, did you start the conversation?
Yeah. So we started a process to say, hey, look, let's look at, like, there was an IPO window. We started that. And then I said, we all kind of agreed, which is a standard process when you're doing an IPO spin up, is you run what they call a dual track process, where you also go see if there's bidders out there. And so we got some inbound bids, and that kicked off a whole process. And I think, my board I had a phenomenal board for Freshly, phenomenal investors, and phenomenal independents. So, Bob Davis, who was Highland Capital, I would say was kind of the de facto chairman of the board. He was the loudest voice. Harley Miller, who was at the time at Insight, but he's now the founder of Left Lane. Jason Finger, Jason Finger is the founder of Seamless. He was an independent board member. We had a few different Nestlé board members that were great. Jeff Hamilton, who was our original Nestlé board member, who's now the SVP or head of Nestlé Noosa. So the board basically said, when we came and said, we want to sell, they said, Mike, we support you. Like, think through what you want to do. We're excited for either journey. It helped that they were in a great position, that everyone was going to make a lot of money no matter what happened. And so I remember having a conversation with Bob, and he said, Mike, and he walked me through, he said, here's the pluses and minuses of this. Here's my experience, blah, blah, blah. But like, think on it, whatever you come back and do. He's like, you don't even need to talk to me. He's like, just email me what you want to do, and we're supportive. So like, I think they were awesome in that process. And then once we went down the avenue of selling it, kind of, you sign a term sheet, then it's a whole lot of work behind that.
So I'm always curious with this kind of thing, especially the VCs and many rounds. And this is another one of those questions where I'm not sure how invasive of a question this is, but I want to ask it. How much dilution was there in your equity? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot, but
So we took a ton of dilution. I would also say, like, that was kind of the nature of the beast, because you're raising aggressively a lot of capital to build and scale. So I think, at the end, I would say, like, plus minus, my total equity was 10% ish.
Yeah.
Which I would say, like, for sure nowadays you could do that with less dilution. I think the best you could do that kind of situation was, like, even today would be like, you'd end up with 20%. And a degree on that is that, when you scale, and the other way to minimize dilution is just go slower, right? Build it profitably, self-fund, don't raise capital. But so I guess that would be kind of probably like, I don't know what the number would be, but probably 70% dilution-ish would be, I guess.
Now, you have kids? You're married?
4 kids, married.
Yeah, 4 kids. How old is your oldest?
6.
Oh, that's an interesting timeline. So
she came after the journey. So she was.
It's 2026 right now. You sold in 2020.
2020. She was born right before COVID, and she was 10 months old when we sold the business.
10 months old when you sold. And when did you meet your wife?
I met her at the end of 2018.
That's interesting. So you met her in the middle of all this.
I met her, and I think which was fortunate. And I do think that's why, if it's your first time startup, that's why young people do startups, because you have no other life commitments and you have no other. And
that's exactly where I was going with this. Yes.
Yeah. And so when you're working 20-hour days, it's like you're not, what else would I be doing? It's like when we moved the company to the city, it's like all of us, but we hired a bunch of young people and we worked 7 days a week. But it was like, what else would we be doing? Like, it's like, there's nothing else to do. And we liked what we did. So I think all of the team liked what we did, and then we just built the offices so that they were fun. Like we wanted to watch football on Sunday. Well, great. We just put a big screen TV in there, and then we got the NFL package, and then we were all in there working on Sunday, doing work and doing stuff. But like, it was quintessentially just truly like startup, which is like, we built our lives around work, not like, and I do think in the early days, especially if it's your first time, because I think this is what people always ask, like, what's different on your second one? I said, well, like the second one, I know what I'm doing. The first one was just brute strength. Like I just didn't know what I didn't know. And so I had to make a million mistakes to kind of figure things out. Now I know a lot more, so I can get to the right answer a lot quicker. But like when it's your first go, you got, like, there is no shortcut to just working long hours. And if you want to win, the longer the hours you're willing to work, the more likely you're going to win.
Have you cut back on your hours since starting Cutting Horse and the veterinary pet folk?
Not really, because I've added more things. So, but I love what
okay. So you got 4 kids. You're still working a ton. How do you fit that in? Where do you live, in the city? Or do you live in the outskirts? I live in the outskirts, so I take a train in. Our office sits right above the train station, so not by accident, by design. Yeah. So I do a lot of work on the train. I like the train because I can do my emails in the morning. It's a great connection. My wife's a stay-at-home wife. She wanted that even before, so that helps because I have a great partner who really takes the heavy lift on our kids, and she is the predominant, caregiver. And then I try to set some parameters around, I'm an early morning person. So I get up every morning at 4:15. My day starts, so I get a workout. I mean, I'm always the first in the office. I get cranking quickly. I will do no more than, 15 minutes for lunch. So I just work really aggressively. Then I try to be home at 5, have dinner, hang out. And then I can kind of plug back in for a few hours. That's amazing. Yeah, I love that. And so everything you said registers with me, and you're home at 5. Like, that was a surprise for me to hear.
Yeah, I get home because I do that last hour. Again, I have a lot of systems set up around me to make sure that I'm working kind of full capacity. But
so you must have your calendar. I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you. I'm just so into this conversation. So you must actually block off your calendar, or whoever helps you with the calendar blocks off your calendar from like 3:30 to 7. Like, so your meetings happen before 3 or 3:30. For me is like, I want to optimize. So my entire calendar is planned and color coded based upon everything I'm doing. So for example, this podcast, I have a 30 minute block before this podcast to do background and make sure, and then that's all put into my meetings, calendar notes. So everything is blocked out, even to the point that we block out bathroom breaks and all those different things. So I can just be highly efficient on that. My trains are on the calendar. I know exactly when I leave here. So I try to be very thoughtful. Now, I am not, and I sometimes, like, I listen to podcasts or something like this, and I'm like, oh, I wish I was that. So I'm organized. I just set up structures. I'm not personally that organized. I like the organization. And then if I get like a deep zone of work, I'll just like fire off Slacks to my EA saying, hey, cancel things. I want to do this now. So like, it's rigid but flexible in that, I am the boss, so I get to kind of change things. But I try to put a lot of process so that I can be very effective. And so, for me is like, how do I make sure that like I'm getting
what used to take me 18, 20 hours, I could do that now in 10 hours. But then I'm also a bit of a slight bit of a workaholic. So I'm always in some aspect of work. It's a bit of my complaint that my wife has, is that even when I'm there, I'm not there a lot of the times. And so, that's a little bit of, I think that like, even when I'm at the dinner table, I'm thinking about the thing that we're struggling with at work. I'm thinking about, and my brain doesn't shut that off. So I wish I was better at that, but I do think that's also what makes me good at business, is that I'm like constantly thinking about it. My quote with my team is always like, I'm like 7-Eleven. I'm not always doing business, but I'm always open for business. So like, that is accessibility, but I try to do a better job at that. It's just saying, hey, to the degree you can, compartmentalize and make sure you're trying to win on both ends. But we say this a lot, and I think you have to be it's like, there can't be two number one priority. You have to say, like, what do you do the most, the best? And, I do, I would say, a lot more work than I do family time. And that's just the reality of my life. And I have a great partner who does the exact opposite. She does, 14 hours of heavy lifting with our kids. And then, I try to be there and present when I can.
I want to be respectful to your time. We're coming up in an hour here, and I have just a couple more questions. You started Petfolk with your sister, I think, supporting your sister in the development of that. It sounds like you're pretty active in that, but your other business, Cutting Horse, is a VC firm. I think you said 75 million you've raised. Yep. Is that right?
Yes.
In listening to one of the other podcasts you were on, I heard someone say you're pretty quick to no. You're pretty, and I love the way you said it. You're like, yes is the preferable answer, but a quick no is the second most preferable answer. And I totally agree with that. When you're making a decision, where you're looking at a pitch, what are the things you're looking like? What would drive a no very quickly, and what would drive a yes? What are the things you're looking for in a pitch?
Well, I mean, so for us, we're early investors. So it always starts with founder, then the TAM or the industry, and then product. And it's that order of prioritization for us. So I think first and foremost, that gets us either to no or yes is the founder aligned with kind of how we think about what makes a good founder? I would say that like our rule is not necessarily the golden rule of like, but it's the kind of founder that wants to work with us. So people always ask, well, what does that look like? It's grit, it's hard work, it's tenacity, it's someone who's putting in long hours, it's the person who's not trying to build their own ego and their own things, and it's coachability. So do they demonstrate the willingness, the want to learn, the desire? Are they taking advantage? And we do a lot of micro tests around this. Are they taking advantage? If I'm on a conversation, and if I'm a food person and I'm on the conversation with me and I'm a first-time founder, I'm peppering me with questions. Hey, what do you do to this? How do you do this? Can you make an intro? Because even if this investment doesn't happen, I'm going to take advantage of this call. And so what we always want to see is that the kind of founder, is the founder who's showing up, who's saying like, I want to learn nonstop. Because where we bring value is not that we have the crystal ball. We don't know all the answers, but we have done a lot of the things. So it's a little bit of like, if I'm a golfer and if I hire a golf coach I don't want to listen to the golf coach. There's not really much he can do if I'm not willing to listen. Now I don't have to listen to every single thing he says, but at the end of the day, the more I'm going to pay for a golf coach, the more I respect their advice. I want to hear their advice. I want to understand it. And if I disagree with it, I want them to understand that this is why I disagree with it. So that's number one for us, is the founder. Number two for us is the industry. We generally, our model
industry
is,
mean the TAM. Was that the same thing? The industry and the TAM?
Like, we would never invest, like we invest in food. We would never invest in, like a vegetable food company, because we don't believe in the margins. We don't like that margin profile. So we tend to want to be in high margin categories. So there is some degree of self-selection out of industries that we just feel are really hard. We wouldn't invest in Freshly. So like Freshly would be an example of a business. We'd be like, nope, too thin of a margin business. There's too much complexity around that. So Cutting Horse would not be an investor in a Freshly. And then the final thing is that product. So it's early stage. We want to see that product does have, product market fit. But surprisingly, that is not like number one, right? So like product market fit matters, but like what we really got to be aligned on is the vision, the founder's ability to execute on the product, because the product in the early stage should evolve, and you should have an evolution around that product, and it should constantly be getting better. So we're okay with like being like, the product's not quite where we'd want it to be, but we see this founder's ability to kind of to craft and get this going in a better spot. We look for a lot of efficiencies. Our model's a little different. We would just basically say to anyone is like, we are more expensive capital than others because we really come in as operators and help. So we're very concentrated, but we come in, we like to say equal parts McKinsey, equal parts Sequoia. So like we come in and really want to help and lean in. We only do a few investments. So if you're just looking for someone who's going to be cheap capital, there's other guys out there who will be better. If you're just looking to say, hey, I don't really want advice, I just want capital, there's going to be others. But if you really want a partner and you really feel we can add value on your journey and you want to work with us, again, I always tell people, VCs is a two-way dating, right? You got to like them, they got to like you. And if you don't, it's got to work both ways. And if it doesn't, then you don't get married, right? Like I always tell people, dating's cheap, marriage is expensive. So like if it doesn't feel good, don't think it's going to get better. Like it only gets worse. Like if it's, again, very similar to dating. Like if you're not happy while you're dating someone, don't get married and think it's going to get better. It's not. Like, and so we're very transparent with who we are. We're very transparent with how we show up. We're very honest on how we think we can add value. But we also want founders to feel okay firing us or being like, hey, I don't think you're a perfect fit with us. And we're okay with that. But we try to give quick answers because what we do know with founders is your time is the most precious thing. So if we're not going to be a yes, we want to try to be as quick as a no as possible. And we want to be transparent with why we're a no. Because I do, as a founder who's raised lots of money, I may not agree with you, but I want to hear what your concern is. Because what I want to do is I want to take that concern and then I want to make sure I'm addressing it better to the next person. So in that we feel thankful that a founder spends time with us, we want to at least add value back to. Now, not every founder takes that positive, but I always feel that like, look, you don't have to agree with our feedback. But it's just it's an endpoint. It's data, and so the great founders I will say is like they take that and they're like, I appreciate that. Would you mind if I call you in 6 months? I'd love to address this. And so you're like, yeah, great. We'd love that.
You got an amazing story. I mean, there's not a lot of people with that story of scale and success. And I love how you describe it. Are you on the speaking circuit? Do you go around and tell your story to groups and businesses? And
I am. I'm doing more speaking. You can visit me at MikeWystrach.com. And I don't do a lot, but I've had a few people, so I'm doing a few more of those.
And that's Mike, MikeWystrach.com.
Yes, okay. That is it. You can always still follow me on Instagram, MikeWystrach.com. On LinkedIn, we post a lot of stuff there. I have a newsletter called The Advantage, and soon starting a podcast. Joining the podcast, fellows like you, The Advantage podcast. So and I think for me is like I feel so thankful to be part of this founder network and this founder universe. I had a bunch of people pay it forward to me. I had great advisors, and so, what I really want to do is give back to the community and say like, what knowledge. And I think similar to how you started this podcast is like, I just love talking to people and hearing, and I also learn a lot from it. And I like, so even if no one else listens, I feel like it's for me, it's really exciting. And I love learning about all sorts of business, small businesses, big businesses. I talked to a guy the other day who started a hedge fund. I was like fascinated. Like, how do you start a hedge fund? Like, it seems so archaic to me, or like not archaic. It seems so like you're going to start. And this guy started with a $15 billion fund. I was like, how do you start? Because again, that's why you said like, I always see guys like that. And I think there's always like that person above you where you're like, whoa, that's like huge. Your first fund is 15 billion. But I think going through those
billion, where does that come from?
And how do you and that's always like to me is like, and I think you started that as like, how do you have the guts to like go out and say like, okay, my first fund. And so it was really cool. But then also like, how do you put that much money to work? Like, how do you think like 15 billion, like that's a ton of money to put to work. So how do you put that to work? How do you think about that? How much money how many people do you need to deploy that capital? how much
And then you
front
better
office, back
return
office.
something on that, right? You
And then
better
what's your-
return. It's a
and
lot
what's
of
your
pressure.
return? But it's always interesting. Again, I love business. I really do love business. I love learning about all sorts of businesses. So I have a ton of fun doing it. And on the Advantage newsletter, it's really focused more on founders of kind of, how do we, how do I give tidbits and things that I think are helpful for people? So if you're looking for those, please subscribe.
And you said you're starting a podcast too. Advantage.
The podcast starts in, I think our first one's going to come out in a month or 2 months. So,
Which is, what's the date of that? Is this will be, we need a little timestamp for your podcast. That'll come out in August-ish, August, September of 2026?
It'll come out, it'll come out end of July, August. So end of July, August. Okay. Again, visit MikeWystrach.com and you can sign up for the newsletter there. You can see all the podcasts. You can get all the past things I've written on there. So it's an all-encompassing website with everything Mike Wystrach there is. But
I love it. Thank you, Mike. This was really, really interesting. Fun to talk to you.
Perfect. Very much appreciate you having me on.